Okay, so now we will move on to the third type of evidence, quotations or testimony. Basically, it means something that you take from figures of authorities or people who know a lot about the subject that you are writing about. Okay, so the first requirement of quotations, they must come from appropriate sources. If you're talking about smoking and lung cancer, you might want to quote a researcher who does a lot of studies or who researches a lot on smoking and who has a background in biology, in medicine, or you can quote from a doctor, for example. They are appropriate sources. But if you want to write about smoking and you want to write about lung cancer, and then you quote some singer, or you quote your own grandmother, who is just a teacher, who teaches literature. Now your grandmother teaches literature. She may not know much about smoking or about lung cancer because she doesn't have the knowledge. You shouldn't quote from her and say that, well, my grandmother often tells me that smoking is bad for my health. Therefore, people shouldn't smoke. Well, your grandmother doesn't really know much about smoking or lung cancer, for example. Okay? Similar to other types of evidence, statistics, or example, you need to explain and comment on quotations because quotations also can be understood in different ways. You have to be careful. And again, when you explain them, you must explain them with reasoning and logic. For example, I have here a subtopic. Great impromptu speaking requires time and effort. Impromptu speaking basically means that you are asked to speak without much preparation, like in your IELTS speaking test. You are given a topic, you have 1 minute to think, and then you just talk about it for some minutes. That's called impromptu speaking. So my topic here is that good impromptu speaking needs time and effort. And I quote Mark Twain, the famous American author. Mark Twain once said, "It usually takes more than 3 weeks to prepare a good impromptu speech." And then after I quote him, I have to explain what he means. What Mark Twain means is that even though there may be truly improvised speeches, good ones actually require thorough preparation, perhaps even rehearsals and research. So that's what I understand what Mark Twain means. Other people may understand the quotation differently. They may understand that Mark Twain says this to prove that there is no impromptu speech at all. Because, by definition, impromptu speech means that you cannot prepare. But he says that, a good impromptu speech needs preparation. So maybe what he means is that there is no such thing as an impromptu speech. You see, other people may understand the quotation a little bit different from me. Or they can understand something like, there are impromptu speeches, but there are no good ones. Good impromptu speeches need preparation, which is by definition something that impromptu speeches don't have. So maybe what he means is that impromptu speeches are normally bad because you don't have time to prepare. So as you can see, one quotation, many ways to interpret it. Same thing with examples. If you don't explain examples, people may understand your examples in a different way. Let's look back at the example about my uncle who smoked a lot and died. In here, if I don't tell people what I think, if I don't tell people what I want my example to prove, people may misunderstand me. They read this example about my uncle who started smoking at 3 years old. And then he got lung cancer at 40, and then he died 5 years after that. And then a lot of people may read this example and they are confused. They say, okay, what do you want to prove? I may not use this example to prove that smoking is bad. I may use it to prove that parents back then, they didn't care, or they didn't really know that smoking was bad. That's why they allow their children to smoke at 3 years old. Like my grandparents, they didn't care or they didn't know that smoking was harmful, so they let my uncle smoke at 3 years old. That's one of the possible things I can prove from this example, parental irresponsibility. or parental ignorance, you can say. Or I can also use this one to prove that, well, it takes a long time for you to have lung cancer. You smoke at 3, takes you 37 years to have lung cancer. So it's okay to smoke when you are old. Like if you are 60, why bother? Just smoke. You die in 67 anyway. So here it means that maybe young people should not smoke, but old people, smoke away. Doesn't matter. You see? So one example can be used to prove many things, many topic sentences. You might want to tell your reader what you want it to prove. Otherwise, your reader will get confused. Okay, I have this example. I have this evidence. But what does it prove? You have to tell them by explaining and commenting on your evidence. Okay?